Hi, I'm Sophie. 3 months ago, I woke up from a coma to discover my family had been selling my organs while I was unconscious, the ones my body had been using to keep me alive. It was happening. My brother was checking his bank account when he said, "The kidney transfer is tomorrow." My Aunt Clara nodded as if they were discussing weekend plans, not pieces of me. No warning, no remorse, just paperwork and a medical consent form on my bedside table. But what they didn't know, what they never saw coming, was what the heart monitor would reveal next. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tuesday mornings in Seattle carried a weight I never noticed before. Rain tapped against the hospital windows, casting gray shadows across monitors that had become my silent companions. I had been lying there for 8 weeks now, hovering in that space between living and gone. They called it a persistent vegetative state, but that term never captured what it felt like to be trapped inside yourself, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to even blink on command, just consciousness floating in a body that refused to respond. This wasn't how I planned to spend my 27th birthday. A car accident, they said. A drunk driver who walked away without a scratch while I was left with a traumatic brain injury and a prognosis that made doctors speak in hushed tones. Outside my door. I didn't cry anymore, not that anyone could see anyway. Grief had a different texture when you were the one being grieved for, still present, still piercing, but it lived in silence, in the in-between. That Tuesday started like any other. The nurses came in, checked my vitals, adjusted my feeding tube, spoke to me like I could answer back, which I appreciated even though I couldn't respond. Then my family arrived like clockwork, my brother Marcus first, then Aunt Clara who had moved into my apartment to take care of things, while I was away, as if I were on vacation and not fighting for my life in a hospital bed. They never touched me, not really. Marcus would pat my hand awkwardly like I was a strange dog he wasn't sure wouldn't bite. Clara would adjust my blanket, but only the corner furthest from my actual body. That day though, something was different. There was tension in the air, a nervous energy that made the monitors seem louder somehow. I could feel it even through the fog that clouded most of my thoughts these days. Dr. Patel confirmed the match, Marcus said, his voice low but not low. Enough. We need to move fast before anything changes. Clara nodded, her pearl earrings catching the fluorescent light. The lawyer says everything's in order for tomorrow. Sophie signed the donor card, it's all above board. I tried to scream, to move, to do anything that would show them I was here, I was listening, but nothing happened, not even a twitch. They kept talking, numbers, dates, procedures, as if I were already gone, as if my body were just inventory to be catalogued and distributed. The liver will cover most of the medical bills, Marcus continued, scrolling through something on his phone. And the kidney should take care of the mortgage, at least. Clara sighed, relieved. Thank God she kept herself healthy. All those morning runs finally paying off. I felt sick, not physically, that wasn't possible anymore, but somewhere deeper, somewhere they couldn't measure with their machines. How long had this been happening? How many parts of me had they already sold while I lay there, unable to protest? The nurse, Jennifer, came in then, breaking their conversation. She had kind eyes and always spoke to me directly, not over me. Or around me like I was furniture. Time for your bath, Sophie, she said cheerfully. My family stepped out into the hallway, but their conversation continued in harsh whispers. We need to finalize the heart arrangement, Clara said. That's the big one, that's her retirement fund right there. Jennifer didn't know I could hear everything, didn't know I understood. She hummed softly as she worked, her hands gentle but efficient. I wanted to grab her arm, to blink, to do something, anything to communicate what was happening, but my body remained still, betraying me like it had been doing for weeks. When she finished, she looked at my face for a long moment, her head tilted slightly. Your eyes look different today, Sophie, she said. More alert somehow. If only she knew. If only anyone knew. I was screaming inside, a constant, never-ending scream that echoed through my consciousness but never made it past my lips. It was torture, pure and simple, worse than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. After Jennifer left, Dr. Chen came in for his daily check. He was the neurologist assigned to my case, a serious man with round glasses and a voice that never seemed to rise above a whisper. He checked my reflexes, shone lights in my eyes, made notes on his tablet, all while explaining what he was doing, like I was a medical student observing my own case. Any changes? Marcus asked from the doorway, trying to sound concerned, but I could hear the edge in his voice, the fear that I might actually wake up and ruin their plans. No significant changes, Dr. Chen replied. But we're continuing to monitor brain activity. There are occasional spikes that could indicate some level of awareness. I wanted to scream yes, I'm aware. I'm here. But nothing happened, not even a flutter of my eyelids. But she's still considered unresponsive, right? Clara pressed. The legal definitions haven't changed? Dr. Chen glanced at her curiously. No, the diagnosis remains the same for now, but with brain injuries, we always maintain cautious hope. Recovery can be unpredictable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Of course we hope, Marcus said quickly. We just need to be realistic about her care and the options available to us as her family. Dr. Chen nodded, but I could tell he was uncomfortable with their questions, their eagerness for me to remain unconscious. It wasn't normal, it wasn't what families usually asked, but he had no reason to suspect anything. I was just another patient, another body in a bed, another set of vital signs to monitor. After they all left, I was alone again with just the beeping monitors for company and my own thoughts, which had become both my salvation and my prison. Ever since the accident, I developed a way of escaping into memories, into detailed reconstructions of my life before, to keep myself from going mad. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I thought about my apartment, the one Clara was now living in. The plants in the window that were probably dead by now. The collection of vintage cameras I'd spent years curating. The half-finished novel saved on my laptop that no one would ever read now. I thought about my job as a photojournalist, the stories I'd never get to tell, the places I'd never get to see. I thought about my dog, Max, who I'd been told was now living with my colleague Diane, who was the only one to leave flowers by my bed each week, though she hadn't been by recently. Night fell, and the hospital quieted, but my mind was racing, trying to piece together what I'd heard. They were selling my organs while I was still alive. How was that even possible? Even with a donor card, there were laws, ethics committees. Doctors wouldn't just harvest organs from someone who wasn't actually brain dead, would they? Unless they thought I was. Unless my family had somehow convinced them I was. The next morning arrived with a flurry of activity, nurses, doctors, specialists, people I'd never seen before examining charts and monitors, speaking in quick technical terms to each other. This wasn't normal, this wasn't the usual routine. Something was happening, something big. Prep her for surgery at 2 p.m., someone said, a voice I didn't recognize. Make sure the family has cleared out by then, we don't need them hovering. Surgery? But I wasn't dead yet. They couldn't take my organs while I was still alive. That was murder, that was impossible. And yet, the preparations continued. A nurse I didn't know checked my for. Another adjusted my bed. A third marked something on my leg with a pen. I was terrified, truly, deeply terrified in a way I'd never experienced before. Then Jennifer arrived for her shift, looking confused. Why is she prepped for surgery? She asked another nurse. I didn't see anything on the schedule. Organ donation, the other nurse said quietly. Family signed off yesterday. It's all rushed because they found a match for the kidney. Recipients already here from Boston. Jennifer frowned. But she's not brain dead. We haven't done the final tests. She still has brain activity. That's not protocol. Orders came from upstairs, the nurse shrugged. Talk to Dr. Patel. Jennifer looked at me then, really looked, her eyes showing concern, genuine worry. She touched my hand, not my blanket, not the rail, actual contact, her palm against mine. Sophie, if you can hear me, I'm going to figure this out, okay? For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Not much, just a flicker, but it was there. Someone had noticed, someone was questioning. But would it be enough? Would anyone listen before they cut me open and removed pieces of me while I was still conscious, still aware? Marcus and Clara arrived an hour later, dressed nicer than usual. Marcus in a suit, Clara in a black dress, as if attending a funeral. My funeral. They didn't speak to me at all this time, just to each other in hushed, excited tones about accounts and transfers and what they'd do with the money. We should sell the apartment too, Clara said. Once this is done, she won't need it, and the market's hot right now. Already listed it, Marcus replied. Got a showing scheduled for next week. Figured we could move her stuff into storage if there's anything worth keeping. If there's anything worth keeping, as if my entire life could be reduced to a few boxes of worth keeping while the rest was discarded like trash. They weren't just taking my organs, they were erasing me completely, as if I'd never existed. At all. Jennifer returned with Dr. Chen, both looking serious. I need to speak with you both outside, Dr. Chen said to my family, his voice formal, clinical. They left, and I was alone again with just the monitors and the clock on the wall showing 12:47, just over an hour before they were planning to wheel me to surgery, to cut me open while I was still alive, still conscious, still screaming inside. My own head. I focused everything, every ounce of will, every fragment of strength I had left on moving anything, a finger, a toe, an eyelid. I concentrated harder than I ever had in my life, imagining neural pathways lighting up, imagining messages traveling from my brain to my muscles. I visualized myself screaming, kicking, fighting for my life, which is exactly what I was doing. Nothing happened. The monitors continued their steady rhythm. The clock ticked forward, 12:51 now. The walls remained blank, indifferent to my struggle. My body remained still, a prison I couldn't escape. And then something changed. The heart monitor spiked, just once, a single beat stronger than the others before returning to its normal pattern. I focused again, channeling everything into making. It happened again, and there it was, another spike, stronger this time, the line on the screen jumping high before settling. I didn't know if anyone would notice, if anyone was watching, if anyone would understand what it meant, but I kept going, kept focusing, kept fighting the only way I could, with a heart that was trying desperately to speak for me when nothing else would. Jennifer rushed back in, her eyes immediately going to the monitor. "Sophie," she said urgently, leaning close. "Sophie, if you can hear me, if you're trying to communicate, show me again." I focused everything I had, and the monitor spiked 3 times in rapid succession, not random, not a glitch, but a pattern, a deliberate pattern. Jennifer's eyes widened. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're in there, aren't you?" She pressed the call button repeatedly, urgently. "I need Dr. Chen in here now," she called out. "Now." Dr. Chen arrived moments later. "What is it?" "Look at this pattern," Jennifer said, pointing to the monitor where I was still managing to create irregular spikes. "That's not random, that's communication. She's responding to questions." Dr. Chen frowned, looking skeptical. "That could be, ask her a question," Jennifer insisted. "A yes or no question." Dr. Chen hesitated, then looked at me. "Sophie, if you can hear me, make the monitor spike once for yes." I gathered all my strength, focused everything I had, and the line jumped dramatically once. "That could be coincidence," he said, but I could hear doubt in his voice. "Sophie, are you in pain?" Jennifer asked. "1 for yes, 2 for no." I made it spike twice. "Do you understand what's happening around you?" 2 more deliberate spikes. Dr. Chen's expression changed completely. "Get Dr. Patel and cancel that surgery right now," he said to another nurse who had appeared in the doorway. "And call security. I want the family kept away until we sort this out." Jennifer squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. "We hear you, Sophie. We hear you now." For the first time in months, someone heard me, actually heard me. It wasn't my voice, it wasn't my words. But it was communication. It was proof I was still here, still fighting, still alive. And they couldn't take that away from me. They couldn't sell pieces of me anymore, because now everyone would know the truth. Now the heart monitor had revealed everything. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of tests, specialists, meetings, and the constant beeping of machines measuring every aspect of my consciousness. I still couldn't move, couldn't speak, but the heart monitor had become my voice, my lifeline, my only way to communicate with the world outside my prison. They developed a system, 1 spike for yes, 2 for no, 3 for I don't know, and it wasn't much, but it was everything. It was proof I was still here, still fighting, still me. Marcus and Clara were barred from my room pending investigation, hospital security posted outside my door like silent guardians. They told me nothing about what was happening with my family, but I could hear whispers between shifts, nurses exchanging shocked glances, doctors reviewing paperwork with furrowed brows. I knew something big was unfolding, but I remained trapped. In my body, unable to ask the questions burning inside me. Jennifer became my constant companion, working extra shifts to stay with me. She spoke to me like a person, not a body in a bed, not an object to be studied or sold. She told me about her life, her dreams, her fears while she adjusted my tubes and checked my vitals. She made me feel human again when for so long I'd felt like nothing more than inventory. "They found the documents, Sophie," she said one evening, her voice low, serious. "Your brother and aunt, they forged consent forms, used your power of attorney to authorize organ donation while you were still alive. It's all being investigated now. The police are involved." I spiked the monitor once to show I understood, my heart racing with a mixture of relief and horror, relief that they'd been caught, horror that it had gone so far, that they'd been willing to kill me piece by piece for profit. The people who shared my blood, who were supposed to protect me, had instead seen me as nothing but parts to be sold and discarded. Dr. Chen brought in a neurologist from Johns Hopkins, a specialist in consciousness disorders, a woman named Dr. Rivera with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. She connected electrodes to my head, explained everything as she worked, her voice steady, reassuring. We're going to try something new, Sophie, she said. A different way for you to communicate. More detailed than just yes and no. If it works, it could change everything for you. The tests took hours, mapping brain activity, monitoring responses, looking for patterns. Dr. Rivera asked me to think of specific words, to imagine moving specific fingers, to recall certain memories while machines recorded everything. Eventually, she sat back, exhausted but smiling. She's definitely in there, she told Dr. Chen. Full consciousness, completely aware of her surroundings and what's happening to her. The brain scans confirm it without question. I spiked the monitor once, hard, the line jumping dramatically across the screen. It was validation, it was vindication, it was proof of what I'd been trying to tell them for months. I'm here, I'm aware, I understand everything. We can set up a brain-computer interface, Dr. Rivera continued. It will take time to calibrate. But she should be able to communicate through a computer screen eventually, spell out words, sentences, express herself more fully than just yes and no responses. For the first time since the accident, I felt hope, real, tangible hope. Not just that I'd survive, but that I might have a voice again, that I might be able to tell my story, to explain what happened, to ask all the questions that had been building inside me for months. The next morning, a police detective came to my room, a tall woman with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She introduced herself as Detective Sloan, explained she was investigating the attempted organ harvesting, the forged documents, the money trail, everything. I know this is difficult, Sophie, she said, standing at my bedside. But I need to ask you some questions. We've worked out a system with the doctors, 1 spike for yes, 2 for no. I'll keep it simple. She asked about consent, whether I'd ever agreed to organ donation while still alive, whether I'd given Marcus power of attorney, whether I knew about their plans. I answered as best I could, 1 spike, 2 spikes, my heart speaking when my voice couldn't. We found bank transfers, Detective Sloan said. Multiple accounts your brother set up in the Caymans. Nearly $300,000 already deposited for previous procedures. Do you understand what that means? I spiked the monitor once, hard. It meant they'd already taken from me, already sold pieces I couldn't get back. I didn't know which parts, couldn't feel what was missing, couldn't check my body beneath the hospital gown, but I knew with sickening certainty they'd already begun harvesting long before the heart and kidney transfers were scheduled. Medical records indicate partial liver resection 2 weeks ago, she continued, confirming my worst fears. Sold on the black market to a recipient in Singapore. They told the surgical team you were brain dead, that it was your final wish. The money trail connects directly to your brother and aunt. Both are in custody now, refusing to speak without lawyers. I wanted to scream, to cry, to rage, but all I could do was spike the monitor over and over and over until Jennifer rushed in, worried I was having a seizure. But it wasn't a seizure, it was grief, it was betrayal, it was the realization that, while I lay trapped in this body, unable to protect myself, the people I should have been able to trust had literally been selling me off piece by piece. That night, alone in my room with just the glow of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital, I tried to process everything, tried to understand how we'd gotten here. Marcus had always been competitive, always resented that our parents had spent more on my education because I'd earned scholarships he hadn't, but this was beyond sibling rivalry, beyond jealousy. This was monstrous. Clara had moved in with us after our parents died when I was 16, always critical, always cold, but I never imagined she hated me enough to see me as nothing more than parts to be sold. I drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by fragmented dreams of surgeries I couldn't remember, of scalpels and sutures and hands reaching inside me, taking pieces while I screamed silently, unable to stop them. I woke in cold sweats, my heart monitor spiking erratically until nurses would rush in to check on me. Those nights were the darkest, the loneliest, when the truth of what had happened settled over me like a shroud I couldn't shake off. The brain-computer interface arrived 2 days later, a complex system of electrodes and screens and processors. Dr. Rivera spent hours setting it up, explaining each component as technicians calibrated and tested the machines. It was exhausting, demanding work requiring intense concentration on my part, focusing on specific thoughts, specific patterns to establish baselines. This will take time, Sophie, Dr. Rivera warned. Weeks, maybe months before you're fluent with it. Don't get discouraged. It's like learning a new language with a completely different part of your brain. The first attempts were frustrating, painful almost, moving a cursor across a screen using only thought, trying to select letters one at a time with nothing but concentration, the equivalent of trying to thread a needle while wearing boxing gloves. It left me mentally exhausted, each session lasting only 30 minutes before I couldn't focus anymore. But I kept trying, every day, every session, pushing myself harder than the doctors recommended because I needed this, needed to speak, needed to tell my story, needed to ask the questions burning inside me. Who knew what they were doing? What else had they taken? Who had they sold to? How long had they been planning this? 2 weeks into training with the interface, I managed my first full sentence, 5 words that took nearly 40 minutes to compose, but they were mine. They were. My voice appearing on the screen one painstaking letter at a time. Where is the rest of me? Dr. Chen and Jennifer exchanged glances, neither wanting to answer, neither knowing how to explain what had been done to me while I was conscious but voiceless. Finally, Dr. Chen spoke carefully. Your brother and aunt authorized several procedures. Over the past 2 months, Sophie, presenting forged consent documents claiming brain death. They sold tissue and portions of organs on the black market, primarily to overseas buyers. We've confirmed partial liver resection, 1 kidney removal, and several smaller procedures. The full extent is still being investigated. I stared at him through eyes that couldn't even widen in shock, couldn't fill with the tears pressing behind them, couldn't look away. 1 kidney gone. Part of my liver gone. Who knows what else taken while I lay here, aware, feeling everything. But unable to scream, unable to fight back, unable to protect myself from the people who were supposed to protect me. I turned back to the interface, focusing with everything I had, forcing the cursor across the screen, selecting letters one by one in a sentence that took nearly an hour to complete. I felt everything. Jennifer gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dr. Chen turned pale. You were conscious during the procedures? He asked, his voice barely audible. 1 spike on the heart monitor. Yes, I had been conscious, had felt every incision, every tug, every slice as they took pieces of me, had screamed silently into the void as my own flesh and blood betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. We'll need to adjust your pain management immediately, Dr. Chen said, turning to leave. And I'm calling in the hospital ethics committee. This goes beyond malpractice. This is criminal on multiple levels. After he left, Jennifer sat beside me, her hand over mine, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Sophie. I'm so sorry this happened to you. I can't even imagine. I turned back to the interface, my next message taking less time as I grew more familiar with the system. Not your fault. Thank you for hearing me. Later that day, a different doctor arrived, a psychiatrist named Dr. Murray who spoke softly about trauma, about processing what had happened, about the long road ahead, both physically and mentally. She used phrases like unprecedented situation and complex grief and betrayal trauma, clinical terms that couldn't possibly capture the horror of what I'd experienced. We're here to support you, Sophie, she said. Whatever you need, however long it takes. Your recovery is our priority now, all aspects of it. Recovery. I wondered if that was even possible. How does one recover from being harvested alive? How does one heal from betrayal so profound it rewrites everything you thought you knew about family, about trust, about love itself? I couldn't answer those questions, couldn't see a path forward, couldn't imagine a future beyond this bed, these walls, these machines. The media got hold of the story somehow, of course they did. A case this sensational, this horrific couldn't stay private. Hospital staff began whispering about reporters camped outside, requests for interviews, statements from doctors, specialists discussing my case on morning shows without using my name, but everyone knew, everyone was talking about the woman who was conscious while her family sold her organs, the woman who communicated through a heart monitor, the woman who heard everything. Dr. Chen kept them away from me, protected my privacy as best he could, but I could feel the weight of their attention, their morbid fascination, their desire to make me into a headline, a cautionary tale, a trending topic. I wasn't ready for that, wasn't sure I'd ever be ready to become public property when I was still trying to process what it meant that parts of me were literally the private property of strangers now. Diane visited finally, bringing news of Max. Photos of him happy in her backyard chasing squirrels. She cried when she saw me, apologized for not coming sooner, explained she'd been told by Marcus that I didn't want visitors, that I was unconscious, that it would be too upsetting, another lie, another way they'd isolated me, cut me off from people who might have noticed something wrong, people who might have protected me. He seemed so concerned, so devoted, she said, wiping her eyes. Always here every day, calling for updates. I had no idea, Sophie. I had no idea what they were doing. I used the interface to respond, still slow, still laborious, but getting better with practice. Not your fault. They fooled everyone. That night, I couldn't sleep, couldn't close my eyes without seeing scalpels and surgical lights, without feeling phantom pains in places where parts of me were missing. I asked for the interface to be left on, needed the connection to the outside world, needed to know I could still speak, even in this limited way. In the dark, I laboriously spelled out my thoughts, creating a journal of sorts, recording everything. I remembered everything I felt, everything I feared. It was therapy in a way, the only kind available to me at 3 in the morning when the hospital quieted and the weight of what had happened threatened to crush me. I remember everything, I typed. The sound of scissors. The smell of antiseptic. The cold. The voices of surgeons who thought I couldn't hear them. The pain I couldn't scream through. I remember Marcus watching from behind glass. I remember wishing I could die instead of enduring more. I remember hoping someone would notice, someone would save me. The words appeared on the screen letter by painstaking letter, my thoughts made visible, my trauma given form, my voice finally heard after months of screaming into the void. It wasn't healing, wasn't closure, wasn't justice, but it was something. It was mine. It was the beginning of reclaiming what they had tried to take from me, not just organs, but humanity itself. In the morning, Jennifer found me exhausted. The screen filled with my night thoughts, my confessions, my fears. She read them silently, tears in her eyes, then printed everything, made it part of my medical record, part of the evidence, part of the permanent record of what had been done to me. They need to know, Sophie, she said softly. Everyone needs to know what happened to you, not as gossip, not as headlines, but as truth, as testimony, so nothing like this ever happens to anyone again. I blinked slowly, the only physical response I could manage, and turned back to the interface to type 6 words that took all my remaining strength. I want to tell my story. Detective Sloan returned with updates. The investigation expanding beyond just Marcus and Clara to include Dr. Patel, who had facilitated the procedures, the lawyer who had processed the paperwork, the overseas buyers who had purchased parts of me knowing they came from a living donor, the network that had made it all possible. They found more money than we initially thought, she explained. Offshore accounts, properties purchased through shell companies, luxury items paid for with cash. They've been planning this for over a year, Sophie, even before your accident. We found emails discussing insurance policies taken out in your name, contingency plans if you ever became incapacitated. The accident, I had always assumed was random, bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. But now, looking at Detective Sloane's face, I could see there was more she wasn't saying yet. I forced the cursor across the screen, spelled out the question that suddenly seemed so obvious, was accident really accident? She hesitated, looked toward the door as if making sure we were alone. We're investigating that angle now. Your brother's phone records show calls to the driver who hit you 3 days before the accident. We've brought him in for questioning. He's talking, looking for a deal, claiming Marcus paid him $50,000 to run you off the road, not kill you, just injure you enough to be hospitalized. The monitor spiked erratically, alarms blaring as my heart raced with the horror of this new revelation. My own brother had orchestrated my accident, had planned my harvesting, had intended all along to use my body as his personal ATM. It was beyond betrayal, beyond evil, it was calculated, premeditated, monstrous. Nurses rushed in, stabilized me, sedated me slightly to bring my heart rate down, but my mind couldn't be sedated, couldn't be quieted, couldn't process the magnitude of what I'd learned, the depth of the conspiracy against me by my own blood. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my accident had been a carefully constructed lie designed to turn me into inventory, nothing more. That night, I dreamed of Marcus as a child, holding a butterfly pinned to a board, watching it struggle, examining it with cold curiosity. I dreamed of Clara counting money, stacks of bills soaked in something red and sticky. I dreamed of surgeons with faces like blank masks cutting and cutting and cutting while I screamed without sound. I woke to the beeping of monitors, the quiet hum of machines, the reality that was somehow worse than the nightmares. The next day, Dr. Rivera arrived with something new, a more advanced interface. She called it a next-generation BCI, something still experimental but promising that might allow for faster communication, more natural interaction with the computer. She spent hours setting it up, explaining the technology, the possibilities, the limitations. It reads more subtle brain patterns, Sophie, she said. Allows for more intuitive control. Think of it like going from hand-unpack typing to touch typing. It will still take practice, but once you're comfortable with it, you should be able to communicate much more efficiently. The new system felt different somehow, less like trying to move a physical object with my mind and more like directing my thoughts themselves. The cursor moved more smoothly, responded more quickly to my intentions. Within hours, I was typing at nearly triple my previous speed. It wasn't conversation, wasn't speech, but it was communication, real, substantial communication. I want to know everything, I typed. Every procedure. Every part. Every buyer. I need to know what they took from me. Dr. Chen brought in my complete medical file, explaining each procedure, each part taken, each buyer as far as they knew, the partial liver resection sold to a businessman in Singapore, the kidney to a recipient in Dubai, tissue samples to research facilities, skin grafts to a burn unit in Mexico City. It was clinical, detailed, horrific, but I needed to know, needed to understand the full extent of what had been done to me. The good news, if we can call it that, Dr. Chen said carefully, is that you can live a relatively normal life with the remaining kidney and partial liver. Both organs can regenerate to some extent. The other procedures were minimally invasive, primarily tissue harvesting rather than full organ removal. You will need medication and monitoring, but physically, you can recover. Physically, perhaps. But what about the rest? What about the trauma, the betrayal, the violation, the knowledge that pieces of me were living inside strangers around the world without my consent? What about the trust shattered beyond repair? What about the family that had seen me as nothing but parts to be sold? What about the future I'd planned before all of this happened? I typed slowly, deliberately. They didn't just take my organs. They took my life, my trust, my future. Who am I now? Dr. Murray, the psychiatrist, had no easy answers, no platitudes, no false promises of healing, just presence, just witness, just acknowledgement of the magnitude of what had been done to me. Recovery isn't linear, Sophie, she said. And what you've experienced is unprecedented. We'll find the path together, day by day, moment by moment. I'm here for as long as it takes. As the investigation continued, more details emerged, more horrors uncovered, more people implicated in the conspiracy to harvest me alive. Bank records showed payments dating back 18 months before my accident. Insurance policies, transfers to offshore accounts. They had been planning my destruction long before the car that hit me. They had seen me as an investment, a commodity, not a sister, not a niece, not a person. The prosecutors came, confident of conviction, multiple charges against multiple defendants. Conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud, medical malpractice, human trafficking. The list went on and on. They wanted my testimony, wanted me to appear in court eventually, to tell my story in my own words, or at least through the interface that had become my voice. Your testimony will be crucial, Sophie. The lead prosecutor explained. Nothing will impact a jury more than hearing directly from you, experiencing what you experienced, understanding what was done to you while you were conscious but unable to protest. I agreed, of course I agreed. Needed to speak, needed to be heard, needed justice, needed the world to know what had happened in this hospital while I screamed silently into the void. But the trial was months away, and I was still here, still trapped, still processing, still trying to understand who I was now that parts of me were missing, now that everything I thought I knew had been revealed as lies. The new interface became my lifeline, my connection to the world, my way of reclaiming my voice, my agency, my humanity. I practiced for hours every day, growing faster, more fluent, more natural in my communication. I began to write not just responses to questions but my own thoughts, my own story, recording everything I remembered, everything I felt, everything I feared so it would never be forgotten, never be minimized, never be erased. I am still here. I wrote one night when the hospital was quiet, when the weight of everything threatened to crush me. I am still here. They took pieces but not all. They sold parts but not my soul. I am still here and I will be heard. Spring arrived outside my window, painting the world in colors I could only observe from my hospital bed. Cherry blossoms pink against blue skies, rain washing everything clean, signs of renewal while I remained static, unchanged, trapped in a body that still refused to respond to my commands. 37 days had passed since the heart monitor revealed my consciousness, since they stopped the harvesting, since I began the slow, painstaking process of reclaiming my voice through technology. But I was still here, still fighting, still surviving despite everything they had tried to take from me. The advanced BCI interface had become an extension of myself, my thoughts flowing more naturally through the system, words appearing on screen almost as quickly as I could think them. The doctors called my progress remarkable, unprecedented, but to me it was simply necessary, the only way forward, the only path back to some semblance of self. That morning, Dr. Rivera arrived with something new tucked under her arm, a sleek laptop with additional components I didn't recognize, her eyes bright with excitement as she set it up beside my bed. We've been working with some colleagues at MIT, Sophie, she explained, connecting wires, adjusting settings. They've developed an adaptation to the BCI that might allow for more natural communication, text-to-speech integration. The computer would speak your words aloud as you think them. A voice. I would have a voice again, not my voice, not the one I remembered from before the accident, but a voice nonetheless. A way to be heard without screens, without waiting for someone to read my words. A direct connection to the world around me. The calibration took hours, exhausting, precise work. But I pushed through the fatigue, the headaches, the strain, focusing on the possibility of speech, the chance to communicate in real time, the opportunity to reclaim one more piece of myself from the void. Ready to try? Dr. Rivera asked finally. The system humming softly beside me. I focused my thoughts, directed them through the interface the way I'd practiced for weeks, and a voice emerged from the speakers, synthesized but clear, feminine but not quite human. Yes, I am ready. Jennifer, who had been watching from the corner, gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, tears in her eyes. Dr. Rivera beamed, adjusting settings, tweaking parameters, responding to my feedback about pitch and speed and tone. The more you use it, the more natural it will become, she explained. The system learns, adapts, becomes more intuitive with practice. You'll be able to control inflection, emphasis, even emotional tone to some extent. I focused again, directing my thoughts, shaping them into words that became sound. Thank you for giving me back my voice. It wasn't perfect, wasn't natural, wasn't the voice I remembered from my life before, but it was communication, real, immediate, present. It was one more step toward reclaiming what had been taken from me, one more victory in a battle I hadn't chosen but refused to lose. That afternoon, Detective Sloan returned with updates on the case, files tucked under her arm, coffee in hand. Dark circles under her eyes suggesting sleepless nights spent pursuing justice on my behalf. The driver confessed, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. Gave us everything, texts, phone records, payment details. Marcus approached him at a bar where he worked, offered him $50,000 to run you off the road, not kill you, just injure you enough for hospitalization. He claims he didn't know about the organ harvesting, thought it was an insurance scam, but he's still facing attempted murder charges. I directed my thoughts through the interface, the synthetic voice speaking words that still felt strange. Coming from a machine instead of my throat. And Marcus? What is he saying? Detective Sloan's expression hardened. Still denying orchestrating the accident, but we have the evidence, the money trail, the communications. We've frozen all their assets, accounts, properties, everything. They're looking at decades in prison, both of them. Clara's trying to cut a deal, claiming Marcus was the mastermind, but the evidence suggests they were equal partners. Equal partners in my destruction, equal architects of my dismemberment, equal beneficiaries of the parts of me they'd sold to the highest bidders. The knowledge still felt surreal, impossible to fully comprehend, that the people who shared my blood had seen me as nothing but inventory to be liquidated. Have they shown any remorse? The synthetic voice asked the question that had been burning inside me. Detective Sloan hesitated, choosing her words carefully. No, they're primarily concerned with protecting themselves, their assets, their freedom. They've hired expensive lawyers, are fighting every charge. I'm sorry, Sophie. I wish I had better news. I wasn't surprised, not really, had expected nothing less from people capable of selling their family member in pieces. But the confirmation still stung, still burned, still tore at whatever was left of my heart after everything they'd taken. The next day brought a different visitor, Diane with Max on a leash, special permission granted by Dr. Chen who understood the healing power of connection, the importance of love that asked for nothing in return. Max sniffed the air cautiously at first, then recognized me despite everything, despite the tubes and wires and machines. His tail wagging frantically, his whole body wiggling with joy as he tried to reach me. Can he come up? Diane asked. Dr. Chen, who nodded, helping lift the dog carefully onto the edge of the bed where he immediately pressed his warm body against my side, his head on my chest, his brown eyes fixed on mine, full of unconditional love. I couldn't pet him, couldn't scratch behind his ears, couldn't ruffle the fur on his neck the way he loved, but I could feel him, warm and solid against me, could smell the familiar scent of home, of before, of a life that seemed increasingly distant with each passing day. Hello Max, I missed you, the synthetic voice said, the words flat, emotionless, but Max's ears perked up, his tail wagging harder, as if he understood despite the strange mechanical tone that this was me, his person, speaking to him after months of silence. Diane updated me on my apartment, now vacant after Clara's eviction, my possessions in storage, my plants rescued and thriving in her sunroom, my cameras carefully preserved, waiting for the day I might use them again, if that day ever came. She spoke of friends who asked about me, coworkers who sent their love, neighbors who had been horrified to learn what happened. Everyone wants to help, Sophie, she said, squeezing my hand. Just tell me what you need, anything at all. What I needed couldn't be given, couldn't be found, couldn't be purchased. What I needed was a body that responded to my commands, organs that hadn't been sold to strangers, a family that hadn't betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. What I needed was a time machine to go back to before all of this began. But since none of that was possible, I settled for what I could ask for. Just keep visiting, keep bringing Max, keep reminding me there's a world outside these walls. After Diane left, a new doctor arrived, one I hadn't met before, Dr. Patel, not the one who had facilitated my harvesting, but another Patel, a neurologist specializing in traumatic brain injuries and rehabilitation. He studied my charts, my scans, my history with careful attention to detail. "I'd like to try something, if you're willing, Sophie," he said finally, looking up from my file. "Your brain scans show activity in motor pathways that hasn't been properly evaluated. The damage from the accident was severe, but not necessarily permanent. I believe there might be potential for partial recovery with aggressive therapy." Hope, dangerous, seductive hope, flickered to life inside me. I'd been told so many times by so many specialists that my condition was permanent, that movement was impossible, that this bed, this room, these machines were my future for whatever remained of my life. I'd accepted that truth, had focused instead on communication, on voice, on telling my story. "What kind of therapy?" the synthetic voice asked, betraying none of the desperate longing I felt. "Intensive neurological rehabilitation, electrical stimulation of muscle groups, specialized physical therapy techniques. It would be challenging, painful, possibly disappointing, but there's enough activity in your motor cortex to suggest it might not be futile." Challenging, painful, possibly disappointing, but not futile, not hopeless, not certain to fail. I directed my thoughts through the interface, the synthetic voice carrying my decision into the room. "When do we start?" The therapy began the next day, brutal, exhausting work. Electrodes attached to my limbs sending currents through unresponsive muscles, therapists moving my arms, legs, fingers in repetitive patterns, trying to re-establish neural pathways disrupted by trauma. Dr. Patel constantly present, monitoring, adjusting, encouraging while I focused everything I had on the simplest commands: lift, move, twitch, anything to prove I wasn't permanently trapped in this unresponsive shell. Days passed without visible progress, my body remaining stubbornly still despite every effort, every current, every manipulation. The hope that had flickered to life began to dim, replaced by familiar resignation, the acceptance that some damage couldn't be undone, some losses couldn't be recovered, some futures couldn't be reclaimed. "It takes time, Sophie," Dr. Patel insisted, reviewing data from the latest session. "Neural regeneration is slow, unpredictable. We're seeing micro-responses, electrical activity that suggests connection even without visible movement. Please don't give up." I hadn't given up, not really, had survived too much, endured too much, fought too hard to surrender now. But the constant effort without result was draining, depleting the reserves of strength I'd carefully built since the heart monitor first revealed my consciousness. That night, alone with just the machines for company, I focused everything I had on my right index finger, just that one small part of me. Staring at it, willing it to move, commanding it to bend, visualizing the neural pathway from brain to muscle, the electricity flowing, the connection establishing, the movement manifesting. Nothing happened. The finger remained still, unresponsive. The same as it had been since the accident. I closed my eyes, exhausted but determined to try again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, for as long as it took. Because if I'd learned anything from this nightmare, it was that survival itself was an act of defiance. The legal proceedings continued, depositions, evidence gathering, preparation for trials that were still months away. I gave my testimony. Through the interface, the synthetic voice speaking my truth to prosecutors, detectives, experts who would help build the case against those who had conspired to harvest me alive. Each session left me drained, emotionally wrung out, reliving the horror, the betrayal, the violation, but I pushed through because justice demanded it, because my story needed to be told, because no one else should ever experience what I had endured. 6 weeks into the rehabilitation therapy, with no visible progress, I was beginning to accept that my body might never respond again, that communication through technology might be the only voice I would ever have again, that the parts of me they hadn't managed to sell would remain as unresponsive as if they had been removed. When Dr. Patel rushed into my room one morning, tablet in hand, excitement visible in every line of his body. "Look at this, Sophie," he said, turning the screen toward me, showing a graph with colored lines, peaks, valleys, patterns I couldn't interpret. "This is your last brain scan. The motor pathways are regenerating, establishing new connections, bypassing damaged areas. It's remarkable, unprecedented." I stared at the screen, trying to understand what it meant, what it promised, what it offered. "Does this mean I might move again?" the synthetic voice asked. "It means we keep working, keep pushing, keep trying because your brain is fighting to reconnect with your body. Now we just need to help it find the pathways." The therapy intensified. New equipment brought in, specialists consulted, protocols adjusted. I pushed myself harder than the doctors recommended, working through pain, exhaustion, frustration, focusing every ounce of will, every fragment of determination on the singular goal of reclaiming my body the way I'd reclaimed my voice. And then, 58 days after the heart monitor first revealed my consciousness, something changed. I was alone mid-afternoon, the room quiet, the sun streaming through half-closed blinds, casting patterns across the blanket covering my motionless legs. I was staring at my right hand, focusing as I did every day on moving just one finger, just one small deliberate movement. It twitched. The index finger, barely perceptible, a movement so slight I thought I'd imagined it until I focused again. Commanded again, and there it was again, a twitch, a movement. Minimal but unmistakable, my finger responding to my command for the first time since the accident. The heart monitor spiked dramatically as excitement surged through me. I focused again, the finger twitching more definitely now, curling slightly. Toward my palm, not much, not even a full bend, but movement. Voluntary, deliberate, mine. I pressed the call button repeatedly, urgently, needing someone to see, to witness, to confirm that this wasn't imagination, wasn't wishful thinking, wasn't a cruel trick of light and shadow. Jennifer rushed in. "What's wrong?" I couldn't use the interface, too excited, too overwhelmed, too focused on maintaining the fragile connection I'd established with that one small part of myself. I directed my gaze toward my hand, where the finger was still twitching, still moving, still responding. She followed my gaze, her eyes widening. "Oh my God, Sophie. Are you doing that?" One spike on the heart monitor, yes, I was doing it. I was moving. I was breaking through the prison I'd been trapped in for months. The doctors were called, tests run, scans taken, excitement building as the impossible became possible, the movement spreading slowly to other fingers, the thumb, the wrist, minimal, trembling motions, but deliberate, controlled, mine. "This changes everything," Dr. Patel said, reviewing the scans. "The neural pathways are re-establishing. We need to intensify therapy, capitalize on this breakthrough, push while the connections are forming." The next weeks passed in a blur of constant work, grueling therapy, small victories, crushing setbacks, moments of progress followed by days of nothing. But I kept pushing, kept fighting, kept believing because I had felt what was possible, had experienced control, had tasted freedom however briefly. "Recovery won't be complete," Dr. Chen warned during one of our regular meetings. "The damage was extensive, the time without movement significant. You need to have realistic expectations, Sophie." I directed my thoughts through the interface. The synthetic voice carrying my determination into the room. "I don't need complete. I just need enough. I need to reclaim what I can of myself." The spring turned to summer, heat building outside my window, the world moving through seasons while I focused on smaller cycles, the daily therapy, the hourly exercises, the minute-by-minute focus on establishing connection with parts of myself that had been silent for so long. Progress measured in twitches and tremors, in fingers that curled, in wrists that rotated, in arms that lifted inches from the bed. One afternoon during a therapy session, as I struggled to maintain a lifted arm, fighting against gravity, against damage, against limitations, the neurologist made a discovery that changed everything. "Sophie, try moving your left leg," he said, watching monitors tracking electrical impulses. I focused, directed my thoughts toward the leg that hadn't moved since the accident, and felt something, response, connection. It wasn't visible, wasn't dramatic, but I could feel it, the message traveling, the leg wanting to respond. "Again," he urged, adjusting electrodes. "Focus everything on your left foot, just the foot." I channeled every ounce of will, every fragment of determination into that single command, and there it was, movement, slight but undeniable. My foot flexing, barely perceptible but real, the monitors confirming what my body was telling me. Neural pathways reconnecting, signals traveling, messages being received. "This is extraordinary," the neurologist said, reviewing data in real time. "The pathways we thought were permanently damaged are finding alternate routes. Your brain is essentially rewiring itself." I knew then that recovery, while not complete, not perfect, not the same as before, was possible, was happening, was real. The prison of my unresponsive body was developing cracks, exits, escapes, routes back to some version of the life I'd lost. That evening, Jennifer sat with me after her shift, talking about her day, her family, her dreams as she had so many times during these long months, her presence a constant in the shifting landscape of my recovery. "I have something for you," she said finally, reaching into her bag, pulling out a small box wrapped in simple blue paper. "I know it's not much, but I wanted to mark the progress you've made, the fight I've seen in you every day since that first heart monitor spike." I couldn't unwrap it, of course, my fine motor control still too limited, my movements still too tremulous, so she opened it for me. Inside, a delicate silver charm on a chain, a heart with an EKG line engraved across it, the line spiking in the familiar pattern that had first given me voice. "So you never forget how you fought back," she said, fastening it around my neck. "How you found a way to speak when they tried to silence you." Tears filled my eyes, the first physical expression of emotion I'd been able to show since the accident. She wiped them gently, understanding the significance of this small sign of returning control. "They took pieces of me, Jennifer," the synthetic voice said as I directed my thoughts through the interface. "They sold parts of me while I was aware, while I was screaming inside. But they didn't get all of me. They didn't get what matters most." She took my hand, the one that could now curl slightly in response, her touch warm, grounding, real. "No, they didn't. They didn't get your spirit, your fight, your voice, the parts that make you you." That night, I lay awake watching moonlight trace patterns across the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened, everything that had been taken, everything that remained, the future stretching before me, uncertain but possible, a path I hadn't chosen but would walk anyway because the alternative was surrender, and I had not survived harvesting alive only to give up now. I focused on the necklace, cool against my skin, the heart, the line, the spike, the moment everything changed, the moment my heart spoke for me when nothing else would, the moment that began the long journey back to myself. Not the self I had been before the accident, before the betrayal, before the harvesting, but a new self forged in unimaginable fire, tested beyond endurance, and still here, still fighting, still determined to reclaim everything that could be reclaimed. Tomorrow would bring more therapy, more work, more struggle, more slow, painstaking progress measured in millimeters, in seconds, in tiny victories invisible to anyone who hadn't lost everything. But it would also bring possibility, hope, a future I was writing one painful movement at a time. They had taken pieces of me, sold parts, harvested tissue while I lay conscious but voiceless. They had seen me as inventory, as product, as profit, not as sister, not as niece, not as human. But they had failed in the end, failed to silence me, failed to erase me, failed to reduce me to nothing more than the sum of sellable parts. I lifted my hand, trembling with effort, just enough to touch the charm at my throat, the physical reminder of the moment my heart spoke for me, the beginning of reclamation, the first step on a journey I was still walking, one painful step at a time, but walking nonetheless, moving forward, always forward, because that was the only direction left, the only choice that honored everything I had endured, everything I had fought for, everything I had survived. My name is Sophie, and they harvested me alive, but they did not take my voice, they did not take my fight, they did not take my future. They took pieces but not the whole, they took organs but not my soul, they took what could be sold but not what makes me me. And that is the victory they never saw coming. Autumn painted the world outside my window in golds and crimsons, while inside room 412, a different kind of transformation was taking place, slow, measured, deliberate. I sat propped against pillows, my hands resting on the tray table before me, trembling slightly but under my control, my fingers curling, uncurling on command, my wrists rotating in small, careful circles. The movements minimal by normal standards but revolutionary for someone who had been completely paralyzed just months before. "Again, Sophie," Dr. Patel encouraged, watching closely as I lifted my right arm 6 inches from the table, held it there, shaking with effort for 5 seconds, then lowered it back down. "Perfect. The neural pathways are strengthening every day." 8 months had passed since the heart monitor first revealed my consciousness, since they stopped the harvesting, since I began the long journey back to myself. The progress slow, agonizing, sometimes barely perceptible, but undeniable, the prison of my unresponsive body developing exits one painstaking connection at a time. I still couldn't walk, couldn't stand, couldn't manage fine motor tasks, but I could move my arms, could turn my head, could feel sensation returning to limbs that had been silent for so long. I could communicate not just through the interface but through expression, through eyes that now blinked on command, through a face that could smile, frown, show the emotions that had been trapped inside for too long. "We're ready to try the wheelchair today," Dr. Patel said, checking notes on his tablet. "The physical therapists will help position you, but I think you're ready for more time in an upright position, for a change of perspective." A change of perspective, that was an understatement. After nearly a year horizontal, staring at the same ceiling, the same walls, the same machines, the possibility of seeing the world from a seated position, of moving through space under my own limited control felt like freedom itself. The transfer was difficult, uncomfortable, 3 people required to move me safely from bed to chair, my body still uncooperative in many ways, still weak from months of immobility, still healing from the procedures they had performed, the parts they had taken. But once settled, the difference was immediate, dramatic, transformative. How does it feel? Jennifer asked, adjusting the footrests, securing the safety belt. I directed my thoughts through the interface, the synthetic voice. That had become mine, speaking words that couldn't capture the enormity of the moment. Like waking up again, like seeing the world for the first time. That first journey was short, just around the room, past the window where I could look down at the courtyard below, see people walking, talking, living their ordinary lives. Oblivious to the miracle happening 4 floors above, the miracle of movement reclaimed, choice restored, agency rebuilt, one neural connection at a time. The trial dates had been set for Marcus and Clara, separate proceedings for separate charges: conspiracy, organ trafficking, attempted murder, fraud, medical malpractice, human trafficking, the list extensive, detailed, horrific. The prosecutors. Confident, solid cases built on evidence, testimony, medical records, bank transfers, communication logs, ironclad cases, they assured me, justice within reach. Detective Sloan visited regularly, updating me on developments, new discoveries, additional charges as the investigation expanded beyond just my family to include the network that had facilitated the sale of my organs, the doctors who had performed procedures without proper consent, the buyers who had purchased parts of me knowing I was still alive, a web of corruption that stretched across continents, involving millions of dollars and multiple victims. I wasn't alone, wasn't the only one harvested alive, just the only one who had managed to communicate, who had found a way to scream through a heart monitor, who had survived to tell the story. The media attention is growing, she warned during one visit. As the trial dates approach, there will be more interest, more coverage, more pressure. We can request a media blackout, protect your privacy if that's what you want. I considered this, the implications, the options, the choice between privacy and testimony, between personal protection and public awareness, between healing in silence and using my voice to ensure this never happened again. I want to testify, the synthetic voice said, carrying my decision into the world. I want them to see me, to hear me, to know exactly what they did while I was conscious but voiceless. The rehabilitation continued, daily, hourly, sometimes. Feeling like my entire existence had been reduced to therapy, exercises, medications, scans, tests, an endless cycle of pushing, breaking, rebuilding. My body relearning what had once been automatic, struggling for movements that had previously been effortless. But I persisted, pushed, fought, clawed my way back toward independence, one trembling motion at a time. You're making remarkable progress, Dr. Rivera said during one of our regular sessions with the BCI interface, which had been refined further, allowing for more natural communication, more emotional expression, more control over the synthetic voice that spoke my thoughts. Many patients would have given up months ago. I'm not giving up, I replied, the voice now capable of emphasis, inflection, almost natural, almost mine. They took too much already. I won't let them take my future too. Late October brought another milestone, the day they removed the feeding tube. My swallowing reflexes recovered enough for soft foods, liquids, carefully monitored. Small victories measured in spoonfuls of applesauce, sips of water, the simple act of nourishing myself reclaimed after nearly a year of dependence. Slow and steady, the speech therapist cautioned, watching as I struggled with each careful swallow. This is a marathon, not a sprint. A marathon I hadn't signed up for, a race with no defined finish line, a journey with no maps, no guides, no guarantees, just the daily decision to keep moving forward, keep fighting, keep reclaiming what had been taken from me piece by painstaking piece. November brought the first pretrial hearings, Marcus and Clara appearing in court for the first time since their arrest. I watched from my room, the proceedings broadcast on a secure feed arranged by the prosecutors so I could witness without being present physically, without being subjected to media scrutiny, public spectacle, the violation of privacy that would come with attendance. They looked different than I remembered, Marcus thinner, his confident swagger replaced by slumped shoulders, averted eyes. Clara older, her carefully maintained appearance faded, hair grown out, makeup minimal. Both wearing prison jumpsuits. Both flanked by expensive lawyers, both pleading not guilty to all charges despite the mountain of evidence, despite the ironclad case against them. Do you want to continue watching? Jennifer asked, seeing my hands trembling not from weakness now but from emotion, from the shock of seeing them after all this time, from the surreal collision of before and after, of family and monsters, of blood and betrayal. Yes, I said, using my own voice now, raspy, weak, but mine, reclaimed after months of therapy, of exercises, of struggle. I need to see everything. I need to witness. The prosecutors presented initial evidence, the broad strokes of the case against them, bank records showing millions from organ sales, medical records documenting procedures performed without proper consent, witness testimonies from hospital staff who had been deceived, communications between Marcus and Clara planning the harvesting, discussing profits, callous, clinical, calculated. Their faces remained impassive, unmoved, unrepentant as the evidence mounted, as their crimes were laid bare, as the full scope of their betrayal was exposed to the harsh light of legal scrutiny. They showed no emotion, no remorse, no recognition of the enormity of what they had done. They still don't see me as human, I said after the feed ended, the room quiet, the images still burning in my mind. Even now, even after everything, they still see me as inventory, as profit, not as family, not as person. Jennifer took my hand, the one that could now grasp weakly in return. That's their failure, not yours. Their blindness, not your invisibility. You are more human, more whole even with missing pieces than they could ever be. December brought snow, transforming the world outside my window, while inside transformation continued, my first steps taken in parallel bars, physical therapists supporting either side, my legs trembling violently under my weight, muscles atrophied, nerves damaged but responding, a miracle by medical standards, an impossibility made possible through sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. 3 steps, Sophie. That's incredible, Dr. Patel said, recording the milestone in my chart. 6 months ago, this wasn't even on the horizon. 3 steps, barely steps, more like controlled falling forward, but movement. Independent, intentional, mine. Each one representing hundreds of hours of therapy, thousands of attempted neural connections, millions of moments of frustration, pain, determination. Each one a victory against those who had tried to reduce me to parts to be sold. The prosecutors visited with updates, trial strategies, witness lists, evidence summaries, preparing me for my testimony, which would be central to both cases, the human face of the horror, the survivor who could speak to the experience of being harvested alive. We'll make accommodations, the lead prosecutor explained. You can testify via video link, use the interface if speaking is too difficult, take breaks as needed, whatever makes this possible for you, Sophie. Your testimony is crucial, but your well-being comes first. My well-being, a concept that had been redefined, rewritten, recalibrated over the past year. Physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, all transformed by trauma, by betrayal, by harvesting, by recovery. No part of me untouched, unchanged by what had happened, no aspect of myself still recognizable from before. I want to be there in person, I said, my voice stronger now though still raspy, still labored. I want them to see me, to face me, to understand that I survived, that I'm reclaiming everything they tried to take from me. January brought another milestone, discharge from the hospital after 14 months, the longest patient stay in the neurological unit's history. 14 months of fighting, recovering, rebuilding, not the same person who had been brought in unconscious after this accident, but not the person they had tried to reduce me to either. Something new, something forged in unimaginable fire, tested beyond endurance, and still standing, still speaking, still fighting. Where will you go? Jennifer asked, helping pack the few possessions I'd accumulated during my stay, the cards from nurses, the equipment I still needed, the medications, the necklace with the heart monitor spike that never left my throat. Diane offered her guest house, I said, carefully placing items in a bag, my movements still slow, deliberate, but increasingly controlled. It's accessible, already adapted for someone with mobility challenges. And Max is there. The transition was difficult, jarring after so long in the controlled environment of the hospital, the world outside overwhelming in its complexity, its noise, its movement, its expectations. I relied heavily on support, home health aides, therapy, equipment, adaptive technologies. My independence limited, fragile, but growing each day, each small victory a step away from victim toward survivor. Max remembered me despite everything, despite the changes in my appearance, my mobility, my voice. He greeted me with the same enthusiastic joy, the same unconditional love, the same acceptance of whatever version of myself I could offer, wagging his entire body, pressing against my wheelchair, licking my hands, my face, anywhere he could reach. He never forgot you, Diane said, watching our reunion, tears in her eyes. Kept looking for you, waiting for you, even after all this time. The guest house became my sanctuary, my training ground, my laboratory for rebuilding a life. I equipped it with everything needed for recovery, physical, occupational, speech therapy equipment, adaptive tools, technologies designed to bridge the gap between capability and intention. A fortress of rehabilitation, a workshop for reconstructing myself. February brought the final pretrial hearings, the last preparations for the legal proceedings that would determine justice for what had been done to me. The prosecutors confident, the evidence overwhelming, the case solid, but legal systems were unpredictable, human judgment fallible. I prepared myself for all possibilities, all outcomes, all versions of justice or its absence. Are you nervous? Detective Sloan asked during her final visit before the trial. It's normal to be anxious about facing them again, about telling your story publicly. I considered this, the complexity of emotions, the layers of fear, anticipation, determination, resolve that filled me as the date approached. I'm not nervous about facing them, I said, looking directly at her, my voice soft but clear. I'm nervous about seeing the people who might have the parts of me that were sold. I wonder if they know where their organs came from, if they think about the person who was harvested alive to save them. She had no answer for this, no comfort, no resolution to offer, just presence, just witness, just acknowledgement of the uniqueness of my position, the singularity of my experience, the questions that might never find answers. March brought the trial itself, the courthouse adapted for my needs, ramps installed, doors widened, spaces created for my wheelchair. The legal system bending, accommodating, recognizing the importance of my presence, my testimony, my voice. In proceedings that would set precedents for cases that might follow. The media attention was intense, despite efforts to control it, to manage it, to protect my privacy. Cameras forbidden in the courtroom but gathered outside, journalists filing daily reports, commentators analyzing every aspect, legal experts weighing in, medical professionals debating ethical implications, my story becoming a flashpoint for discussions about bodily autonomy, medical ethics, family law, patient rights. I wore black on the first day, a decision made deliberately, symbolically, a mourning for the parts of me that were gone, the trust that had been shattered, the family that had betrayed me. A reclamation of agency in the small act of choosing my own appearance after so long in hospital gowns. Marcus entered first, escorted by guards, his eyes finding me immediately, widening slightly, the only indication he gave of surprise at seeing me there, seeing me alive, seeing me watching, seeing me capable of witness. His lawyers had clearly not prepared him for the reality of facing his victim, his sister, the person he had tried to dismantle while conscious. Clara followed minutes later, her composure breaking momentarily when she saw me, a hand flying to her mouth, quickly controlled, smoothed away, replaced by the blank mask she'd worn throughout the proceedings, a mask that revealed everything about the emptiness inside her, the void where family connection should have existed. The prosecution's opening statements were powerful, detailed, unflinching, describing the conspiracy, the planning, the execution, the betrayal, the horror of being harvested alive while conscious, the medical impossibility of my survival, my communication, my recovery. Painting a picture so vivid, so horrific several jurors visibly recoiled, one requested a break, overcome by the reality of what had been done to me. The evidence will show, the prosecutor concluded, that these defendants saw their family member not as a sister, not as a niece, not as a human being deserving of dignity, respect, protection, but as inventory, as products to be harvested, sold, discarded for profit. The evidence will show that they orchestrated an accident to create opportunity, that they falsified documents to facilitate procedures, that they collected millions from the sale of organs, tissues, body parts taken from a living, conscious human being who could feel everything, who was aware of everything, who was screaming silently for help that never came, until a heart monitor spoke for her. The defense arguments were predictable, desperate, grasping, claiming misunderstanding, confusion, good intentions gone awry. Suggesting I had consented before the accident, that they believed they were following my wishes, that medical professionals, not family members, were responsible for any improper procedures. Weak arguments that collapsed under the weight of evidence, bank transfers, communications, plans stretching back years before this accident, that had been no accident at all. My testimony came on the fourth day, my wheelchair positioned carefully before the witness stand, my body still weak, still limited, still healing, but my mind sharp, my memory intact, my voice, whether through my own damaged vocal cords or the synthetic interface I still sometimes relied on, clear, unwavering, determined. Please state your name for the record, the judge instructed. Sophie Elaine Mitchell, I said, my voice soft but audible in the silent courtroom. And your relationship to the defendants? Marcus Mitchell is my brother. Clara Mitchell is my aunt. They are the people who arranged to have me harvested alive while I was conscious. The questioning began, carefully guided by prosecutors, taking me through the timeline. The accident I now knew was deliberate, the coma that wasn't complete unconsciousness, the conversations I overheard, the procedures I felt, the horror of Being aware while parts of me were removed, sold, shipped to strangers, the moment the heart monitor revealed my consciousness, the long journey of recovery that followed. I didn't cry, didn't break, didn't falter, even when describing the sensation of scalpels, the sound of surgical tools, the voices of doctors who thought I couldn't hear, the conversations about profit margins and market rates for pieces of me. I remained composed, controlled, determined that they would hear everything, that nothing would be softened, sanitized, made palatable for comfortable consumption. "And how has this affected you, Ms. Mitchell?" the prosecutor asked, the final question of direct examination. I looked directly at Marcus, then Clara, their eyes avoiding mine, their bodies turned slightly away from the witness stand, from the truth, from the consequence of what they had done. "They didn't just take organs," I said, my voice strengthening with each word. "They took trust, they took family, they took my belief in human connection, they took my sense of safety in the world. They took pieces of me that can never be replaced, never be regrown, never be recovered. But they didn't take everything. They didn't take my voice, they didn't take my will to survive, they didn't take my capacity to rebuild. They took what could be sold but not what makes me human. They harvested organs, but they failed to harvest my spirit." The cross-examination was brief, ineffective, desperate, the defense attorneys careful not to appear insensitive, not to attack a victim whose story had captured national attention, whose testimony had left jurors in tears, whose presence in that courtroom defied medical possibility, legal precedent, human expectation. When it was over, when I was wheeled from the witness stand, past the defendant's tables, past the silent spectators, past the judge who nodded slightly in acknowledgement of what it had taken for me to testify, I felt something shift inside me. Not closure, not healing, not forgiveness, but something adjacent to peace. The knowledge that I had spoken, that I had been heard, that my voice, once silenced, once stolen, once replaced by mechanical beeps, had reclaimed its power, its purpose, its place in the world. The verdicts came 2 weeks later, guilty on all counts for both defendants, the jury deliberating less than 6 hours, the evidence too overwhelming, the testimony too powerful, the horror too undeniable to reach any other conclusion. Sentencing would follow, but the minimums ensured they would spend decades in prison, would never profit from what they had done to me, would never harm anyone else the way they had harmed me. I watched from the courtroom as the verdicts were read, Marcus slumping in his chair, Clara's hand flying to her mouth, neither looking at me, neither acknowledging me, neither showing remorse, regret, recognition of the lives they had destroyed, including their own. Outside, rain fell, washing the world clean as I was wheeled to the waiting van, the media held back by security barriers, by court orders, by the protective circle of people who had helped rebuild me, Detective Sloan, Jennifer, Dr. Chen, Dr. Patel, Dr. Rivera, Diane, all present, all witnesses, all participants in the miracle of my survival, my recovery, my reclamation. "What now, Sophie?" Jennifer asked, helping secure my wheelchair in the van. "After all this, what comes next?" I looked out at the rain, at the courthouse, at the world that had continued spinning while mine had stopped, at the future stretching before me, unknown, uncertain, but mine to shape, mine to create, mine to live on my terms, not theirs. Not defined by what had been taken, but by what remained, what had been rebuilt, what had been discovered in the process of survival. "Now I start living," I said, my voice quiet but clear, determined, resolute. "Now I reclaim everything they tried to take from me. Now I build something new from what remains." 6 months later, I stood supported by parallel bars in the physical therapy center that had become my second home, my legs trembling but holding, my steps small, careful, but deliberate, my progress slow but undeniable. 3 steps becoming 5, becoming 10, becoming a halting walk with a specialized cane, becoming movement, independence, agency reclaimed one painful step at a time. "That's it, Sophie," the therapist encouraged as I reached the end of the bars, turned slowly, carefully, began the journey back. "You're doing it. You're really doing it." I was doing it, had been doing it since the moment the heart monitor first revealed my consciousness, since I found a way to scream through beeping machines, since I refused to be reduced to inventory, to be erased while conscious, to be harvested without consent. I had been fighting, reclaiming, rebuilding, reinventing what it meant to be Sophie Mitchell, what it meant to survive, what it meant to live after being harvested alive. The foundation I established with the settlement money from the hospital, from the doctors, from the network that had facilitated the sale of my organs, provided support for other victims, for research into consciousness disorders, for advocacy for patient rights, for education about organ donation ethics. The horror of my experience transformed into purpose, into meaning, into protection for others who might otherwise suffer as I had suffered. The scars remained, physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual. The missing pieces, the damaged trust. The nightmares, the phantom pains, the limitations, the medications, the therapies that would continue for the rest of my life. But alongside them grew something unexpected, something powerful, something that could never have existed without. The breaking, the rebuilding, the reclamation. I stood at the window of my new apartment, watching sunset paint the sky in colors I had once thought I'd never see again from a vertical position, my reflection ghostly in the glass, changed, transformed, unrecognizable from the woman who had once lived unknowing, unaware of the fragility of trust, the value of voice, the strength hidden in breaking, the possibility contained within rebuilding. They had taken pieces of me, sold parts of me while I was conscious, while I was screaming, while I was fighting silently against restraints I couldn't break. But they had failed in the end, failed to silence me, failed to erase me, failed to reduce me to nothing more than the sum of sellable parts. My name is Sophie Mitchell. They harvested me alive, but I survived. I spoke. I reclaimed. I rebuilt. They took what could be sold but not what makes me human. They stole organs but they couldn't steal my spirit. They tried to silence me, but my heart found a way to scream. And in that scream, in that spike, in that moment, everything changed, everything became possible, everything began again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.